Well, hello everyone. This video is a review, sorta, of the new AMD high-end graphics card, Radeon VII. This came in 2 days ago, and I've been testing it for a while. So we're gonna be comparing it to the previous AMD flagship, the RX Vega 64. I know this is the Strix model. This model has quite a few problems with VRMs and stuff. I fixed it with thermal pads, so it's been fine. So we're going to test both of these guys at mainly 1440p 144 Hz, which is the monitor that I have here. The card is sitting in this system, so it will be mainly 203 synthetics and then a lot of games. I would edit this video a lot more, but I want to get it out there because a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to this GPU, which I think in itself is very expensive. You could say it's $700 for 1080 Ti-like performance 2 years later, and yeah, that's a bit underwhelming. But yeah, let's check the results. I'm gonna put elements close by with the numbers and stuff. I've compared 4 runs for every benchmark. One with the Vega 64 at stock, one with the Vega 64 undervolted. As you know, the stock Vega runs only at 1440 megahertz with 945 on the memory, which gives it 483.6 gigabytes per second. Then another one with the card undervolted and with better clocks, which is like 1570 to 1600 megahertz, with the memory at 1050 megahertz, which gives it 537 gigabytes per second. And then 2 runs of Radeon VII, one at stock, which is 1760 megahertz on the core and 1000 megahertz in the memory, which gives it the massive terabyte per second of bandwidth, which is thanks to the 4 HBM stacks in it. And then an overclocked Radeon VII profile, which runs at 2 gigahertz on the core and 1200 megahertz on the memory, which gives it a bandwidth of 1.2 terabytes per second. This card isn't memory starved as original Vega was, because it has literally more than double the bandwidth, but upping the memory to 1200 gives it around 600 points in Firestrike, which means if you give it more bandwidth, it's going to use it. So that's pretty cool. So we're going to start with some synthetics. The first one is Firestrike Extreme. Sorry, Firestrike Extreme. Yeah. My first score with the Vega 64 at stocked on the Valance profile and Wadman is 9226. So that's not great. It's slightly below what a GTX 1080 can do, a good model anyway. So after the undervolt, and this is the best absolute result that I ever got out of it, is 10,643, which is an improvement of 15.46%. which is its best case scenario for these settings. The graphics score itself is 11,684. So the Radeon 7 at stock gives, in general score, 11,886, which is 28.8% faster than the stock Vega 64, which is right on the money on the benchmarks that AMD gave, and 11.5% faster than the undervolted and overclocked Vega 64, which is more like what Vega should have run at. The graphics score is 13,277 points, which is 13% faster than the undervolted and overclocked Vega 64. As for the Radeon 7 overclock, it gets 13,145, as I said, around 2 gigahertz. Some people in the Not an Apple Fan server are getting quite similar scores, some below me, some better than me. So I had the idea to do this video basically in a similar style to what Paul and Not an Apple fan does. So yeah, it's 42.4% faster than the stock Vega 64, the Radeon 7 overclocked at 13,000 points, and 23.4% faster than the Vega 64 with the undervolt overclock, and 10.6% faster than the Radeon 7 at stock. So 10.6% faster. As for the graphics core itself, quite similar. 14,769, which is 26.4% faster than the Vega 64 overclocked and undervolted, and 11.2% faster than Radeon 7. So 11% of improvement. That's great. As for Unigine superposition, we have 4,282 on the Vega 64 at stock, 4,733 on the undervolted and overclocked Vega, 10% faster, and 5,427. This is at 1080p extreme, mind you, which is 26.7% faster than stock Vega 64 and 14.6% faster than the undervolted overclocked Vega 64. As for the Radeon 7 overclocked, it gives me 5,976 points, which is 39.5% faster than the stock Vega 64, 26.2% faster than the undervolted and overclocked Vega 64, and 10.1% faster than the stock Radeon 7. As for the 4K optimized results, the Vega 64 gives 5,752. The undervolted Vega is 11.6% faster at 6,422, which is quite good. The Radeon 7 at stock is 7,656, which is 33.1% faster than the Vega 64 and 19.2% faster than the undervolted and overclocked Vega 64. As for the overclocked Radeon 7, it's 8,053 points, which is 40% faster than the stock Vega 64 and 25.4% faster than the undervolt underclocked. Wow, this is a lot of numbers. 5.2% faster than Radeon 7 stock. So the gains are kind of more limited for some reason in this benchmark. But moving on, I did some quick Blender benchmark, which gave me, it did the double test, which is like the BMW, the car render, and the classroom, and it took 4 minutes and 55 seconds, which is a very, very good score. So if you like Blender, you should compare it to the cards that you use if you're interested in it. As for the games, because this is both a gaming card and a workstation compute card in some regards. Okay, I'm going to start with, I don't know, let's start with The Witcher 3, 1440p ultra, all maxed out. First, without hairworks. So my test was running through Novigrad City in a mission, going from the portside gate to Priscilla, which is in the pub. It takes 2-3 minutes to go on horse. So it's a worst case scenario for the game because it's the most demanding area, but I think it's a good one to do. So the Vega 64 stock was 75.5 frames per second. Remember, everything maxed, so good result. The Vega 64 with the undervolt is 81.1 frames per second, so 5 frames better, which is fine, I guess. Minimum, maximum's a bit better. So as for the Radeon 7 at stock, it's 93.9 frames per second, which makes it 24.4% faster than the stock Vega 64 and 15.8% faster than the undervolted Vega 64. As for the overclock, this was quite good, actually. It gave me 103 frames per second, average 103.2, which is 36.7% faster than the stock Vega 64, 27.2% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and 11.3% faster than the stock Radeon 7. This is really great performance. And again, this is a very, very good RTX 2080 competitor. Some reviewers didn't really overclock it because the driver was kind of wonky, but it's been getting better over days. Now it's starting to work. Now we're getting this 10-11% extra performance. So at stock, it's generally in games like a wee bit slower than the 2080, so it would be kind of disappointing. Now that we got this 10% margin, which I don't think the RTX 2080 really has because of how GPU boost usually works, it's a very, very good competitor. So 103 frames on The Witcher with everything maxed. As for, I tried Hairworks because Hairworks used to be broken. You have the result here, I'm going to put it on the screen, of the R9 290 losing literally half its performance at 1080p Ultra with Hairworks enabled. So in my case, I did the same run, the same test, and the average was 89.2 frames per second with everything turned to the max. The Hairworks at maximum, not only for Geralt but for everyone, maximum anti-aliasing, 89.2 FPS. That's fantastic. I remember max settings with 1440p used to run about, I don't know, in the 60s, 70s on the 60s for GTX 1080. Could dip below. I did it when I had a 1080. So no Hairworks makes the card around 15.6% faster. So I think AMD has brute forced the optimization of Hairworks, and patches of course have helped. So instead of losing half your performance, you only lose about 15%. So I think that's a bit acceptable now because Hairworks looks quite good at this point. But it was trash at launch and it destroyed all performance, but especially AMD performance. So as for the next test, it's Monster Hunter World, quite a popular game. I tried to do a good balance between games that are very popular and games that aren't. So we have the Vega 64 stock. It's 50.4 FPS. This is at 1440p with everything maxed. I wouldn't play in these settings because I don't like that frame rate, but it's a benchmark, so we push it. So 50.4 FPS. When Undervolted, the Vega 64 gave me 54.6 FPS, which is an 8.3% improvement. So it brings it a little bit closer to being comfortably playable on. So the Radeon 7 at stock, which is, by the way, this card runs well at stock. It hits its boost clock of 1750 MHz, stays in that general area for almost all of the time. So that's great. It's not overvolted to hell like original Vega. Every card has a different millivolt setting. If I go to Wattman, my card sets at 1076 millivolts stock. So if we go to Wattman here, you can't really see it, but it's 76 megahertz millivolts. Sorry. So we were at 54.6. So the Radeon 7 gave us 62.9 with the same settings, which was 24.8% faster than the stock Vega 64 and 15.2% faster than the undervolted Vega 64. If this card couldn't overclock for shit, similar to like the Fury cards did, this would have been quite a disappointment, but we can push it. And after the overclock with the memory and the core, we're at 68.3 FPS average, which makes it a whopping 35.5% faster than the stock Vega 64, 25.1% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and 8.6% faster than the stock Radeon 7. So that's quite a good margin, I'd reckon, and quite a realistic one. And so yeah, the next test is Quake Champions, a game that isn't quite that popular, but I've played around 500 hours of it. So I wanted to test it because every frame makes you faster in this game. The Vega 64, this is 1440p, maxed out settings. The field of view is at 120 degrees, so quite high. 120, okay. I ran for 2 minutes through Blood Covenant, which is a fan favorite map, a remake of DM6 with rocket jumps and everything. 2 minutes running through the map, then retesting for every test. I did one 1440p and one simulating 4K at 150 res scaling, which is like adding 50% on every axis gives you double the pixels, so it's basically 4K. So yeah, 1440p ultra settings. Vega 64 at stock gave me 136.2 frames per second. The Vega 64 with the undervolt was 8.5% faster at 14.7 frames. The Radeon VII at stock was 19.3% faster than the stock 64 and 9.9% faster than the undervolted 64 with 162.5 frames per second at average, which is already overkill for this monitor, but we're benchmarking, so we're gonna extract every frame that we can out of it. And with the overclock, we got a very good 181.3 frames per second, which is like 19 extra frames, which is quite great, which makes it 33.1% faster than the stock Vega 64, 22.6% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and 11.5% faster than the stock Radeon 7. 11.5% of margin benefits again. So sorry, my mic should have been there. So yeah, I also tested 4K. At 4K, the Vega 64 was 71 frames per second average. You could play Quake Champions at 4K with the Vega 64, but I wouldn't really recommend it because it's not the best. It's not the best responsive experience. I'd rather have it at ultra wide resolutions or 1440p with bigger refresh rates like this guy here. The Vega 64 got a 9% improvement with the undervolt, which made it output 77.5 frames per second. The Radeon 7 at stock was 85.1 frames per second, so 10 more almost, which makes it 19.8% faster than the stock Vega 64, 9.8% faster than the undervolted Vega, so we're starting to see a little bit of a higher margins at 4K when it's using more memory and probably more bandwidth as well. The Radeon 7 with the overclock this is really good, 97 frames per second at 4K maxed settings, with a maximum of 120. It was around 100 for most of the time, so it's getting there. It's getting to the point where you can play at 144 hertz 4K monitor, but it's not quite there. I think a 2080 Ti would be able to do it, because this is more of a 2080 competitor. Although in some games like Battlefield, it's starting to get close to the Ti, so we'll see what happens with, I don't know, overclocking and driver support. It won't be as fast as 2080 Ti ever in general, but some scenarios it will. So 97 frames average, 36.6% faster than the stock Vega 64, 25.1% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and 13.9% faster than the stock Radeon 7. So almost a 14% improvement with the overclock, which is similar to the close to 15% extra core clock we've put onto it, which tells me that as this card isn't bandwidth limited, the core clock scaling is 1. It's like basically giving the performance referent to the clock that you put in it. So this card in water, low temps, it will be even faster. 2.1 gigahertz I think is perfectly doable on water, as most cards are already doing 2 gigahertz on air. So moving on, we have the most famous game of today. We have Apex Legends. It's a game that it's kind of trying to dethrone Fortnite as the Battle Royale king. And I actually really like Apex Legends. I really enjoyed both the Titanfall games, and I think this one's great as well. Playing with friends, it's very engaging. So you will be surprised with this one, because these results are absolutely mental. Okay, so we're doing 1440p with almost everything cranked, because the ultra texture, I think, demanded over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so we had to put the 6 gigabyte textures on the Vega. So we had to do the same with the Radeon 7, even though it can do it, and even though I would play it with that setting enabled. We're putting it there to keep parity and make it fair. And the field of view is at 100 degrees. I normally play at 110, which is the maximum, but this is what I benchmarked the Vega with, and the Vega is out of the system, so we're doing it at 100. So the Vega 64 at stock is 82.5 frames per second with a maximum of 110, quite playable. The Vega 64 with the Undervolt has an average of 89.6 frames per second with a maximum of 118, which gives it an 8.6% improvement, which is cool. The Radeon 7 at stock has an average of 124.5 frames per second, which is 50.9% faster than the stock Vega 64 and 39% faster than the undervolted Vega 64. This game is limited to 144 frames because it's the same engine that Titanfall had. Titanfall 2 is also limited to 144 FPS. So the Radeon 7 with the overclock, it got me 132.9 frames per second with again a maximum of 145. The minimum though went up to 99, which is great. It means it's perfect. I don't feel the drop as long as it doesn't go like below 95 or 90 most of the time. So this makes it 61% faster than the stock Vega 64, 48.3% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and 6.7% faster than the stock Radeon 7. So if you like Apex Legends, Radeon 7 is absolutely mental. It's amazing. It's great. I want to see if how the 2080 Ti does at these settings, because 133 frames per second at ultra is really nice. So yeah, the theory is that probably this game is memory limited at 8 gigabytes, not enough, or maybe there is a bandwidth bottleneck with Vega going on, which happens in a lot of games. So this removes it, so it's 50% faster. And undervolted Vega and undervolted overclocked Vega versus overclocked Vega, again, basically 50% faster. So that's a really big generational leap, even though it's the same architecture, and Radeon 7 actually has less compute units than the Vega 64. Okay, so moving on, last tests. This is also good. Another game capped at 144 FPS. Prey, the 2017 game, which I love. I think it's a good game in the spirit of the old System Shock and Bioshock games. So what I did was run the intro. For Apex I did tutorial, by the way, to benchmark it, because multiplayer matches of course have a lot of variation, so I thought the tutorial was great for short burst benchmarks. So Prey, the Vega 64 stock was, this is very high preset, 102.9 frames per second on average. So yeah, really good already. Vega 64 with the Undervolt gave me 109.3 frames per second, which is a 6.2% improvement. Sorry. The Radeon 7 at stock hits 133.6 frames per second, so it's already really close to the frame rate cap, which it hits at the max 146, which makes it 29.3% faster than the stock Vega 64, which is on point with what we knew. Again, I'm testing most stuff at 1440p. This is 30% already, so at 4K the margins are even better, I would guess. Yeah, absolutely. And it's 22.2% faster than the undervolted Vega 64. As for the overclock, the Radeon 7 is 140.8 frames per second. So it's hitting the max. It's 36.8% faster than the stock Vega 64. 28.8% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and only 5.4% faster than the stock Radeon 7. But we went from 102 at the lowest end to 140 average, so that's 40 frames. So yeah, good for 144 Hz monitor. As I said, I played only the intro and the helicopter ride. I know it's not a demanding run in itself, probably, but I thought it was good and didn't have many variables, so good for benchmarking. So my final results for today are actually a game that's a bit old, Metro Last Light Redux, the benchmark, which has been used a lot. Exodus, which came out today, has a new benchmark, and that should be cool to look at, but I don't know, I'm just gonna do Last Light. I did 2 runs, one at 1440p, everything at ultra, very high tessellation. The only thing that's off is physics, and another run at simulating 4K with SSAA, super sampling anti-aliasing, which basically chops your frame rates in half, so it's basically simulating 4K. You can say it's DLSS to 4K. Take that, NVIDIA. So okay, 1440p ultra. The Vega 64 at stock is 102 frames per second. 92 frames per second. The Vega 64 with the undervolt is 102 frames per second, which is an 11% improvement. Very nice, Vega. Well done. Radeon 7 is 119.8 frames per second, which is 30.2% faster than the stock Vega 64 and 17.4% faster than the undervolted Vega 64. The Radeon 7 overclocked 2 GHz is 129.8 frames per second, so 10 frames more, which is 41% faster than the stock Vega 64, 27.2% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and just 8.3% faster than the stock Radeon 7, which is still nice because it helps you get nearer to your refresh rate, even though this game isn't that competitive, so it doesn't make that much of a difference. But more performance, we're benchmarking, we're overclocking, we are enthusiasts, this is what we do. So with the super sampling anti-aliasing, the Vega 64 is just 50.8 FPS, which makes sense considering the normal performance at 4K games of Vega. So 50.8. The Vega 64 with the undervolt is hit 56 frames per second on average, which is a 10.2% improvement. As for the Radeon 7, it averages 66.5 frames per second, which is 30.9% faster than the stock Vega 64 and 18.7% faster than the undervolted Vega 64. As for the Radeon 7 with the overclock, which is our final result today, we have 72.2% frames per second, which is 42.1% faster than the stock Vega 64, 28.9% faster than the undervolted Vega 64, and 8.5% faster than the stock Radeon 7. So my general testing, as you saw, was 6-7 games, which with 3 or 4 synthetics. So a little bit of everything. I'm sorry, I'm not Steve. I do study, I go to college, and I have all the time to do 1,000 benchmarks. But I spent some hours here having fun as a normal user, as a normal enthusiast, just like you guys probably watching this. So this is what I've gotten. So as for my final talking point and conclusion, I would say that this card also, out of the box, this GPU here, it is 230 to 240 watts consumption. So don't believe the 300 watt TDP that AMD puts on it, because it's the same as Vega. It only draws 300 watts if you let it use them. At stock, the BIOS is like 230, 240 watts, which is perfectly manageable. The boost clocks are maintained. The temperature is fine. In my case, it was actually lower than most reviewers. I'm mostly in the 60s. Depends on the context. The fan, yeah, it can get kind of loud at 2900 RPM out of the box. It's not a quiet card, but it's not like extremely loud like people are saying. People are saying this is one of the loudest cards they've ever had. I've had quite a lot of GPUs, and I have to say that this card, max load at stock, is like I don't know, similar to other 3-fan dual slot cards, because we are used to big cards like districts, like other cards, with very beefy heat sinks, which these, of course, especially when they only have 2 fans, like a Super Jetstream GTX 1080 that I had. Yeah, if it has giant heat sink, only 2 fans or 3 fans but bigger, those fans will be slower because they won't need to be as fast. So of course it would make less sound, but it's perfectly manageable. And if you want to go down, you have undervolting. Undervolting was amazing on Vega. You had a car which the core was throttling because it hit its power limit and the volts were too high at 1200 millivolts. So it was 1440 megahertz instead of 1546, which was the boost clock, or above depending on the model. So you had to undervolt it to make it be more efficient, consume less. I undervolted my Vega to a point where it kept almost all of its performance at 15. Yeah, well, I had several presets, right? The one I run here, the undervolted, was actually higher, like 1020 millivolts, to make it faster than stock with the memory and everything, so make it run as it was supposed to. I didn't really push it because, as I said, I don't really like it. I like how the Radeon 7 overclocks. It's easier in general. It's less of a pain in the ass. So if we go to Radeon VII in the AMD software, which by the way is great, you have this option here which says auto undervolt GPU. If you're auto undervolted, it will consume automatically 20 watts less, as Jim from Adore TV said, and the fan speed will already be at 2400 RPM, which is much more manageable. And if you want to go even lower, I made my undervolt. I have a profile here which sits at 976 millivolts, which is 100 millivolts less than stock. This keeps 100% of the performance because, well, it's the same clocks. It gives the same scores in Firestrike, the same frames, same 1750, 1760, in that range, up to 1800, which is the target, 1802 megahertz. Okay, so, and I even have the memory at 1200 megahertz because there's no reason not to have it overclocked, same as Vega, because HBM is amazing. It uses very little power. It's so much better than GDDR memory, so just leave it overclocked. So if it wants to use that extra bandwidth, it can, so there's no reason not to have it, right? So yeah, 976 millivolts at that point. Okay, my Vega undervolted to similar point, 970 and 180 millivolts. It was a 180 to 200 watt card, so it used around the same power as a GTX 1080, as a custom 1080, but it was faster because it was Vega fixed with the memory overclock and the better clock speeds and efficiency. It was faster, so it was a better card than GTX 1080. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The problem is that it came bad out of the factory. You had to fix it. But once you fixed it, it was substantially better. It could be substantially faster. So, how much power does Radeon 7 use at this voltage? Okay, it uses between 160 and 180 watts. So we're talking around RTX 2060 2070 consumption in between the two for RTX 2080 performance, which is in a much bigger die. So here's the thing. This is the 7 nanometer TSMC stuff. It's like much more efficient. We're seeing like a lot faster for the same power, and Nvidia is not here yet. This is the first 7nm GPU for the normies, the masses. So to end this, what do I think of Radeon 7? It's a great card. I mean, certainly it has some issues. It's not perfect. I love the design, by the way. It's so slick. The aluminum finish is great. I love it. But yeah, 16 gigabytes of HBM, which I'm not really using. Some game I've seen go up to 10 or 12 gigabytes. But yeah, it's definitely overkill. But they couldn't do a cheaper model because of how the memory system works. They needed all the bandwidth that they could throw at Vega to make it faster, and they did. Problem is, this card is expensive. This costed me €740, which is more than the $699 MSRP. But when you account for taxes, it's the same price, so it's fine. But yeah, is it a good card? Yes. If you don't like Nvidia, if you want the fastest AMD card, it's great. Though the value is questionable. You get better value for your money with a Vega card. Right now, Vega 56s are 300 something euros, so that's the best value if you want it. But if you work in video, if you do 3D modeling, if you want to play at 4K, if you want 144 Hz at 1440p, in all these use cases, Radeon 7 is great. And as I showed, and most reviews didn't do justice to this card. I was just watching some numbers from TechSpot or Hardware Unboxed, so Steve's numbers on Apex Legends and Witcher 3, and they're quite a bit worse than mine. So part of that is because they didn't really overclock it. So the only reviewer that actually made justice somewhat to the card and its capabilities was Optimum Tech. He showed the Undervolt with it using 2070 power at 986 millivolts. I went 10 lower than that, and it was lower than a 2070, closer between 2060 and 2070. So I want to do this to have more data and show what this card is actually capable of. I also understand that the Radeon drivers, the Wattman and everything else wasn't working properly, so it's normal that it's just early stages. It will be weeks until we know what this card is totally capable of, but we're getting there. And this I want this review to be good middle ground to show people a little bit. So in conclusion, what do I make of the Radeon 7? I mean, from all you've seen, it is an amazing GPU. It is really fast. It is really efficient. It is really nice, and it has a ton of memory and bandwidth, which will mean that it will be relevant for years to come. That's fantastic compared to something like the 2080 that has half the memory and much less bandwidth. So do you need this? Do you want this? If you need the extra performance for 4K, or you edit video, edit images, do things in Blender, you play at 144 Hz at 1440p, and you want the maximum settings and getting in basically any game over 100 FPS, then yeah, you want this. It's expensive. It's basically you have the choice. You have three choices. You can get at this price point. You can get a used 1080 Ti, which would be cheap. It's quite a good option. You have this one, and you have the RTX 2080. Which one of the three I would buy? I would buy either a used 1080 Ti or this guy, not the 2080, because it's an 8GB GPU, and I don't like the RTX tax and the RTX features. So I'm recommending the Radeon 7 if you have the money for it, but for most people that want to get into high-end PC gaming, I think the Vega cards are a great choice right now. You can get yourself a Vega 56 here in Spain for €320, and you can search for them, Vega 64s for 400 or less, custom models. These cards are great. They will compete with the 2060, 2070 any day of the week. to 1080 as well, 1070 Ti. These are great, and these are quite good. You can tweak them. You can make a Vega 56 be faster than an RTX 2060, and also cheaper, and also more memory, and also more bandwidth. So by all means, these are great. Vega 56 is the best card in the market right now for me in terms of absolute value, at 320 euro in my case. So this has been it for me. Review of Radeon 7, the reference version. I love the design. I love the aluminium finish. It's good. It's good enough. Custom models are supposed not to come until May. So if you want one, these are fine. This will do you good. If you want to wait for a Sapphire Nitro big boy with a bigger heatsink and stuff, that's great as well. So that's gonna be it for today. I hope you endured this long video and you learned something from these GPUs. And this is not a tech channel, but I guess see you in the next one. Bye.